Most heroes run out of burning buildings. That night, one Marine ran in. Rain hammered the rooftops of Ashford, Oregon, turning the narrow streets into ribbons of silver beneath the flashing red lights of emergency vehicles. The storm had arrived just after midnight, carrying cold wind from the mountains and wrapping the small industrial district in darkness. Smoke drifted across the wet pavement, illuminated by rotating lights that painted the night in shades of crimson and gold. People stood behind safety barriers, watching silently. Some held umbrellas. Others simply stared. No one moved closer. At the center of it all stood Sergeant Caleb Turner, 35 years old, white, broad-shouldered. His olive-green field jacket was soaked from the rain. Water dripped from his sleeves as he watched the old warehouse through narrowed eyes. The building groaned beneath the storm. Smoke rolled from broken windows near the roofline. Firefighters worked around the structure, shouting instructions through radios and hand signals. Caleb should have been driving home after his shift. Instead, something had stopped him. A sound. Faint. Easy to miss. The kind of sound most people would dismiss beneath the wind and rain. But Caleb had spent years listening for details others ignored. He heard it again. A scratching noise. Then silence. Then another weak scrape from somewhere inside the warehouse. His chest tightened. The sound was familiar. Not because he recognized the animal. Because he recognized the desperation behind it. One of the firefighters grabbed his arm. "Stay back, sir." Caleb nodded automatically, but his eyes never left the building. Another scratching sound echoed through the storm. Weaker this time. He took a slow breath. Memories surfaced without permission. A dusty road overseas. A German shepherd running beside him. Long nights beneath unfamiliar stars. A loyal partner who never came home. Caleb forced the memories away. He had spent years trying not to think about them. Yet somehow they returned whenever a dog was involved. The scratching came again, barely audible. Caleb looked toward a side entrance partially hidden by stacked pallets. Smoke drifted from the opening, but it remained accessible. Before he could second-guess himself, he moved. Rain splashed beneath his boots as he crossed the lot. Someone called after him. Another voice shouted. He ignored both. The side doorway opened into darkness. The air smelled of wet wood, smoke, and rusted metal. Caleb pulled his jacket over his mouth and stepped inside. The world narrowed instantly. Shadows. Echoes. The distant sound of rain striking the roof. He moved carefully through aisles lined with storage shelves. Every few feet, he stopped and listened. Then he heard it again. A scrape. A soft whine. Forward and slightly to the left. Caleb followed the sound through the haze until his flashlight landed on a shape near a steel support column. A German shepherd. The dog lay on the concrete floor, exhausted and motionless except for the faint rise and fall of its chest. Its sable coat was dusted with ash. Its amber eyes were half open. Around its neck was only an empty mark where a collar had once been. No tag. No identification. Nothing. Yet the moment the dog's eyes met his, something passed between them. Recognition. Not of each other. Of survival. Caleb knelt beside him. "Easy, buddy," he whispered. "You are not staying here tonight." The German shepherd blinked slowly. Then, with the last bit of strength he seemed to possess, he lifted his head a fraction of an inch and looked directly at Caleb as if he had been waiting for him all along. The rain had not stopped by the time Caleb reached Ashford Animal Medical Center. Water streamed down the clinic windows while distant thunder rolled across the hills beyond town. Bright fluorescent lights replaced the darkness of the warehouse, but the tension followed him inside. Veterinarian Emily Harper moved quickly alongside a team of technicians as they guided the German shepherd into an examination room. Caleb stood near the doorway, soaked from head to toe, unsure why he could not bring himself to leave. He told himself it was because he had found the dog. Nothing more. Yet something about those amber eyes lingered in his thoughts. Emily completed her examination in silence. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and wet fur. Monitors hummed softly in the background. Finally, she stepped outside and removed her gloves. Her expression was thoughtful. "He is stronger than he looks," she said. Caleb released a breath he did not realize he had been holding. "Will he make it?" Emily glanced through the glass window toward the resting dog. "I think he has a chance. But there is something unusual." Caleb frowned. "What is it?" Emily pointed toward a photograph she had taken during the examination. Around the dog's neck was a visible indentation in the fur. This dog wore a collar for a very long time. Recently, Caleb studied the image. Maybe it came off during the fire. Emily slowly shook her head. Maybe, but I do not think so. She enlarged the photograph. The mark was clean and distinct. The collar was removed before tonight. Not weeks ago. Not months ago. Recently. Caleb looked back toward the room. The German Shepherd lay quietly beneath a blanket, breathing steadily. No identification tags. No microchip information had appeared yet. No owner had called. Nothing. You think he belonged to someone? Emily almost laughed. This is not a stray. She folded her arms. Look at his posture. Look at his muscle tone. Look at how he watches every door in the room. Caleb knew exactly what she meant. Even exhausted, the dog seemed aware of everything around him. Trained, disciplined, professional. The realization stirred old memories Caleb preferred not to revisit. Years earlier, before leaving military service, he had worked beside a K9 partner named Shadow. The German Shepherd had been more than a working dog. He had been family. When Shadow was gone, something inside Caleb left with him. Since then he avoided shelters, avoided training grounds, avoided every reminder. Yet here he was again, sitting outside an examination room in the middle of the night, unable to walk away from another German Shepherd. Emily handed him a paper cup of coffee. You know dogs like this? Caleb stared into the dark liquid. I used to. Emily nodded but did not push further. Silence settled between them. Beyond the glass, the dog suddenly moved. Caleb looked up. The German Shepherd's eyes were open. Weak, tired, but open. The dog slowly scanned the room until his gaze landed on Caleb. Then he stopped searching. For several long seconds, neither moved. Something quiet passed between them. Recognition, trust, or maybe simple relief. Caleb stepped closer to the glass. Hey there, buddy. The dog's ears twitched slightly. Emily noticed it immediately. Interesting. Caleb glanced at her. What? She smiled faintly. He ignored everyone else tonight. The Marine looked back at the dog. The dog continued watching him. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, neither Caleb nor the German Shepherd knew it yet, but their lives had just become connected by something far bigger than a rescue. The storm finally passed sometime before dawn. By sunrise, Ashford looked washed clean. Rainwater still dripped from rooftops, and low clouds clung to the hills beyond town, but the air carried the fresh scent of pine and wet earth instead of smoke. Caleb Turner had not slept. He sat alone in a corner of the clinic waiting room, staring into a second cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The television, mounted near the ceiling, played a morning news report about the warehouse fire. Investigators were still searching for answers. Caleb barely listened. His attention remained fixed on the examination room down the hall. Every few minutes, he found himself looking toward the door. Around 8 o'clock, Emily Harper emerged carrying a clipboard. A faint smile softened her tired expression. He is improving. Caleb stood immediately. Can I see him? Emily nodded. Just do not expect much. He is still exhausted. The Marine followed her through the hallway. Sunlight filtered through narrow windows, painting pale rectangles across the floor. The German Shepherd rested on a padded bed near the wall. His breathing was stronger now. His amber eyes tracked movement around the room with quiet awareness. Caleb stopped near the doorway. The dog noticed him instantly. His ears twitched. His head lifted slightly. Emily folded her arms. There it is again. Caleb glanced at her. What? That reaction? She smiled. He watches everyone. But he looks for you. Caleb did not know how to answer. Instead, he stepped closer. The German Shepherd studied him carefully. There was intelligence behind those eyes. Not ordinary obedience. Something deeper. Something learned through years of discipline and partnership. Caleb crouched beside the bed. You are looking better. The dog's gaze never left him. Then something unexpected happened. Caleb rested a hand near the edge of the bed. Slowly, almost cautiously, the German Shepherd extended one paw and placed it on top of his hand. The room became very quiet. Emily stopped writing. Caleb felt a knot tighten in his chest. The gesture was simple, yet it carried the weight of an old memory. Years ago, another German Shepherd had done the same thing after a difficult training exercise. Shadow, his partner, his friend, the dog he had spent years trying not to remember. Caleb swallowed hard. The German Shepherd's paw remained where it was. Trust offered without hesitation. Emily looked between them. That is not random. Caleb nodded slowly. He knew. Outside the clinic window, sunlight broke through the clouds. For the first time in years, a memory surfaced without bringing pain. He remembered shadow running through tall grass. Remembered long patrols. Remembered loyalty that never needed words. The German Shepherd blinked once and relaxed against the blanket. Emily checked the chart. I still cannot find any owner information. Caleb frowned. No microchip? Nothing useful. She pointed toward the faint indentation around the dog's neck. Whoever removed that collar did it recently. Caleb looked down at the mark. Something about it bothered him. It felt incomplete, like a sentence missing its final words. The German Shepherd suddenly turned his head toward the clinic entrance. His ears rose. His entire posture sharpened. For several seconds he stared at the door as though listening for something far away. Then he relaxed again. Caleb noticed every detail. What is it, buddy? The dog offered no answer. Only silence. But somewhere behind those amber eyes, a mystery was waiting. And neither of them knew that the missing collar would soon lead them toward a truth hidden beneath the ashes of the warehouse. By the third day, the German Shepherd was strong enough to walk through the clinic without assistance. The improvement surprised everyone except Caleb Turner. Somehow, each morning when he arrived, the dog seemed a little stronger than the day before, a little steadier, a little more determined. The clinic had settled into a comfortable routine. Sunlight poured through the front windows during the day. The scent of coffee drifted from the staff lounge. Phones rang. Doors opened and closed. Life moved forward in small, ordinary ways. Yet beneath that normal rhythm, questions remained unanswered. The missing collar. The warehouse. The absence of any owner searching for a highly trained working dog. None of it made sense. Emily Harper felt it too. Late that afternoon, she joined Caleb outside behind the clinic where the German Shepherd was taking a short supervised walk. Autumn leaves rolled across the pavement in the cool breeze. The dog moved carefully but confidently, his amber eyes constantly scanning his surroundings. Have you noticed something strange? Emily asked. Caleb watched the dog pause beside a fence line. Only about 100 things. She smiled. No, I mean this. The veterinarian pointed toward a small orange traffic cone near the parking lot. The German Shepherd approached it, circled once, and sat beside it without being asked. Caleb frowned. A moment later the dog stood and moved toward a maintenance shed. Again he stopped beside the door and sat. Then he looked directly at Caleb. That is not random, Emily said quietly. Caleb nodded. He recognized the behavior immediately. Search indication. A trained canine signaling that something required attention. The Marine felt a familiar sensation he had not experienced in years. Respect. Professional respect. This dog had not simply received obedience training. He had worked. Somewhere. For someone. The German Shepherd continued walking until he reached Caleb. Then he sat again and stared toward the distant industrial district visible beyond town. The same direction as the warehouse. Caleb followed the dog's gaze. The memory returned instantly. Smoke. Rain. The empty mark around the dog's neck. I think he is trying to tell us something, Emily said. Caleb remained silent for a moment. Finally he answered. I think he has been trying since the night I found him. That evening, after leaving the clinic, Caleb drove back toward the warehouse. The roads were quiet beneath a sky filled with fading orange light. Investigators had finished their work and removed most of the barriers. The buildings stood dark and empty against the horizon. Wind moved through the chain-link fences with a low whistle. Caleb parked near the entrance and stepped out. Something felt different now. Less like a random accident. More like a puzzle missing several pieces. He walked slowly around the perimeter. Most of the structure remained untouched except for one section near the rear loading area. There, behind a row of storage containers, he found something unusual. A security camera mounted high on a utility pole. The lens pointed directly toward the section of the warehouse where the fire had started. Caleb stared at it. If the camera had been working, it might have recorded everything. Yet when he checked the attached information panel, he found a note from investigators. Recording equipment missing. Data unavailable. The words settled heavily in his mind. Missing. Just like the collar. Just like the owner. Just like the answers. As the sun disappeared below the trees, Caleb looked back toward town. Somewhere inside the clinic, a German Shepherd was waiting. And for reasons he could not explain, Caleb suddenly felt certain the dog knew far more about this story than any human alive. The next morning arrived wrapped in a blanket of gray fog. Moisture hung over Ashford like a veil, softening the outlines of buildings and distant hills. Caleb Turner parked outside the clinic before sunrise, carrying a paper bag of breakfast sandwiches and 2 cups of coffee. The town still slept. Streetlights glowed faintly through the mist. For a few moments he sat behind the wheel, watching the quiet world outside. He could not remember the last time he had felt this invested in anything. Certainly not since leaving military service. Yet every morning his first thought was the same. The dog. Inside the clinic, Emily Harper was already reviewing patient charts. She accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. "You know," she said, "most people rescue a dog and then go back to their lives." Caleb glanced toward the examination wing. "Maybe I am a slow learner." Emily laughed softly. "Maybe." They walked together toward the recovery room. The German Shepherd was not on his bed. Caleb stopped instantly. His pulse jumped. The blanket was still there. The water bowl untouched. The room was empty. Emily frowned. "That is strange." They searched the hallway, the treatment rooms, the rear storage area. Finally, they found him sitting quietly beside a locked supply closet near the back entrance. He was not confused. He was waiting. The moment Caleb approached, the dog stood and looked directly at the closet door. Then he sat again. Emily tilted her head. "There he goes." Caleb nodded slowly. Another indication. Another signal. The same behavior he had demonstrated beside the traffic cone and maintenance shed. Emily unlocked the closet. Shelves filled with cleaning supplies lined the walls. Nothing unusual, at first. Then Caleb noticed a small metal toolbox pushed beneath the lowest shelf. It did not belong there. Emily pulled it out and opened it. Inside was nothing valuable, just old clinic paperwork and unused inventory labels. Yet the dog seemed satisfied. He stood, glanced inside, then walked away. Caleb watched him carefully. He is not pointing at objects. Emily looked at him. Then what? Locations. The veterinarian considered that. You think he is checking areas? Maybe searching. The possibility lingered between them. Later that afternoon, Caleb returned to the warehouse district. This time he brought a printed map of the property and notes from the investigation report. Fog drifted through the empty lots. The industrial area felt abandoned. As he studied the map, something caught his attention. The section where the warehouse fire began sat directly beside a records storage room. Not machinery. Not fuel storage. Records. He remembered what investigators had told local reporters. They had not determined a cause. But now that detail seemed important. Very important. Caleb folded the map and stared at the dark building. Questions continued multiplying faster than answers. Why was a highly trained working dog inside the warehouse? Why had his collar been removed? Why had security recordings disappeared? And why did every clue seem connected to records and information rather than equipment? That evening, back at the clinic, the German Shepherd greeted him at the door. For the first time since the rescue, his tail moved slightly. Not much. Just once. A small gesture. But enough. Caleb knelt beside him. You know something, do not you? The dog's amber eyes reflected the fading sunlight streaming through the window. Calm. Intelligent. Patient. As though he understood the question perfectly. Then he turned toward the front entrance and stared through the glass at the road beyond town. Waiting. Watching. Looking for something that had not yet returned. The following morning arrived colder than the last. A thin layer of frost covered parked cars throughout Ashford, and the first hints of winter lingered in the air. Caleb Turner arrived at the clinic before sunrise as usual. The habit had formed so naturally that he no longer questioned it. He carried coffee for Emily Harper and a small package of dog treats he had purchased at a local store the night before. The sky was still dark when he stepped through the front door. Something felt wrong immediately. The waiting room was quiet. Too quiet. Emily stood near the reception desk speaking with one of the technicians. Her expression changed the moment she saw him. Caleb's stomach tightened. What happened? Emily exhaled slowly. He is gone. The words landed harder than he expected. Caleb stared at her. Gone. The rear gate was open when staff arrived this morning. Emily glanced toward the empty hallway. We checked every room. Every street nearby. He is nowhere on the property. Silence settled between them. Caleb looked toward the recovery wing. Part of him already knew the truth before anyone said it aloud. The dog had left on purpose. Not because he was frightened. Not because he was confused. Because he was following something. Or someone. For the next several hours, Caleb searched. He drove through neighborhoods, parks, trails, and empty lots. He stopped at gas stations and spoke with delivery drivers. He showed photographs to shop owners and construction crews. Everyone recognized the German Shepherd. Nobody had seen him. By noon, clouds gathered over the town, turning the sky pale gray. Caleb found himself standing beside the river that ran along the eastern edge of Ashford. Cold wind rippled the water. He stared across the current and remembered another day many years ago when he had searched desperately for a partner he could not save. The memory returned sharper than usual. He closed his eyes. Not again. He could not explain why the thought hurt so much. He had known this dog for only a few days. Yet loss does not always measure time. Sometimes it measures connection. Back at the clinic, Emily tried to remain optimistic. "He is trained," she said. "He knows how to survive." Caleb nodded but said nothing. The hours passed slowly. Afternoon became evening. Streetlights flickered on across town. A light rain began falling shortly after sunset. Emily locked the front door while Caleb stood near the window staring into the darkness outside. Neither spoke. There was nothing left to say. Then, just after 7 o'clock, a faint scratching sound came from the entrance. Both turned instantly. The sound came again. Soft. Familiar. Caleb reached the door and pulled it open. Cold air rushed inside. Standing beneath the porch light was the German Shepherd. Wet from the rain. Mud clinging to his paws. Breathing hard from exhaustion. But alive. Very alive. For a moment nobody moved. Then Caleb noticed something hanging from the dog's mouth. A worn leather collar. Darkened by soot. Weathered by time. The German Shepherd stepped forward and carefully laid it at Caleb's feet. The clinic fell silent. Rain tapped gently against the windows. Caleb stared at the collar. The dog stared back. And in that extraordinary moment, it became clear that the mystery they had been chasing had just walked back through the front door, carrying the first real answer. For several seconds, nobody touched the collar. Rain continued falling outside the clinic windows, creating soft patterns across the glass. The German Shepherd stood quietly beneath the porch light, water dripping from his sable coat onto the floor. His chest rose and fell heavily from exertion. Whatever journey he had taken, it had not been easy. Caleb Turner slowly bent down and picked up the worn leather collar. The material felt old beneath his fingers. One side was darkened by soot. Small cracks ran through the leather. Yet despite its condition, it had clearly been cared for once. The buckle remained polished. The stitching was strong. This had not belonged to an ordinary pet. Emily Harper closed the clinic door behind them and stepped closer. "Can you read the tag?" Caleb turned the collar over. A small metal plate hung from one side. Time and weather had faded most of the lettering. He carefully wiped away dirt with his thumb. Slowly, several words emerged. "Ranger." The name seemed to settle over the room. The German Shepherd immediately lifted his head when he heard it spoken aloud. His ears rose. His amber eyes focused on Caleb. Emily noticed the reaction instantly. "That is his name." Caleb looked at the dog. "Ranger." The response was unmistakable. The tail moved once. Just once. But it was enough. For the first time since the rescue, they knew who he was. Not a mystery. Not an abandoned animal. Ranger. A working dog with a history. A life. A story. Caleb continued examining the collar. Beneath the name sat another line of text. Daniel Reed. The Marine frowned. The name meant nothing to him. Emily reached for her laptop. "Let us find out who Daniel Reed is." They moved into the office while Ranger rested beside the desk. Rain tapped steadily against the roof above them. The warm glow of desk lamps replaced the cold darkness outside. Emily searched public records while Caleb studied the collar more closely. That was when he noticed something unusual. Near the inside seam, hidden beneath the leather fold, was a tiny metal compartment no larger than his thumb. "Emily." She looked up. "What is it?" Caleb carefully opened the compartment. Inside sat a small waterproof storage device. The room fell silent. Emily stared at it. "You have got to be kidding me." Caleb shook his head slowly. "I do not think Ranger went looking for his collar." The German Shepherd watched them from across the room. Calm. Patient. As though this was exactly what he had wanted them to find. Emily connected the device to her computer. For several moments the screen remained blank. Then folders appeared. Documents. Images. Reports. The first file contained personnel records connected to a private warehouse security operation. Another contained inspection reports. A third listed unusual inventory discrepancies spanning several years. Caleb leaned closer. The deeper they searched, the clearer the picture became. Daniel Reed had been a security officer assigned to the warehouse property. He had spent months documenting irregular activities and preserving records. One note appeared repeatedly throughout the files. "Trust Ranger." Caleb stared at the words. A chill moved through him despite the warmth of the room. The German Shepherd had not returned with the collar because he wanted to remember the past. He had returned because someone had trusted him with the future. Outside, the rain finally began to fade. Inside, the mystery that started in smoke and darkness was beginning to reveal its first real truth. The next several days changed everything. What began as a rescue had quietly become a mission. Each evening after work, Caleb Turner sat with Emily Harper in the small clinic office reviewing the files hidden inside the collar. Outside, autumn slowly surrendered to winter. The trees around Ashford lost more leaves each morning. Cold winds swept through the streets. Frost appeared on windows before sunrise. Yet inside the warm glow of the office lamps, a different kind of light was emerging. Truth. The records left behind by Daniel Reed painted a picture that investigators had never seen. Warehouse reports showed repeated discrepancies. Security logs contained unexplained gaps. Several inspection records had vanished from official databases, but survived inside the hidden storage device. Daniel had spent years preserving copies. Not because he expected recognition, because he feared the information might disappear. Caleb often found himself staring at one particular photograph. It showed Daniel standing beside Ranger near the warehouse loading docks. The German Shepherd looked younger, but the eyes were the same. Alert, loyal, unwavering. On the back of the digital image was a short note. "Best partner I ever had." The words lingered with Caleb long after he closed the file. One evening, while snowflakes drifted outside the clinic windows, Emily discovered another folder buried deep within the archive. Inside were personal journal entries. Daniel had documented concerns about activity inside the warehouse long before the fire. He described missing records, unusual inventory movements, and repeated attempts to discourage questions. Yet the most remarkable entries were not about the warehouse at all. They were about Ranger. Page after page described the dog's intelligence, discipline, and ability to remember locations and objects months after a single exposure. One entry made Caleb pause. "If anything ever happens, Ranger knows where to go." The Marine read the sentence twice. Then a third time. Across the room, Ranger lifted his head from the floor and looked toward him. Caleb felt a chill move through his chest. The dog had not stumbled back to the clinic carrying that collar by chance. He had completed a task entrusted to him by someone who believed he would never forget. Several days later, local authorities reviewed copies of the files. Questions that had remained unanswered after the warehouse incident suddenly received new attention. Additional records were examined. Missing documentation resurfaced. The official investigation expanded. Through it all, Caleb found himself watching Ranger differently. Not as a rescue, not as a mystery, as a partner. One cold afternoon, they walked together beside the river east of town. Snow covered the banks in thin white layers. The water flowed dark and steady beneath the winter sky. Ranger trotted beside him without a leash, staying close by instinct rather than command. Caleb stopped near an overlook above the water. The dog stopped too. For a moment, they simply stood there listening to the wind. Then Caleb spoke softly. "You carried that responsibility a long way, did not you?" Ranger looked up at him. His tail moved once. The same small gesture. The same quiet answer. Caleb smiled. Somewhere behind them, life continued. Cars passed. People hurried through their routines. But here beside the river, something deeper settled into place. Daniel Reed's truth had survived. Ranger had fulfilled his promise. And for the first time in years, Caleb felt a purpose returning to his own life, carried not by orders, rank, or duty, but by the steady presence of a dog who never stopped believing in the mission he had been given. Winter arrived fully by the time the story finally came to rest. Snow covered the hills surrounding Ashford in quiet layers of white, softening fences, rooftops, and country roads beneath a blanket of stillness. The warehouse investigation continued in the background, carried forward by the records Daniel Reed had protected and the evidence Ranger had faithfully delivered. Questions were being answered. Missing pieces were finding their places. Yet for Caleb Turner, the most important part of the story no longer lived inside files or reports. It lived in the simple moments that followed. On a cold December morning, sunlight spilled across the frozen fields outside his small home at the edge of town. Smoke drifted from the chimney. Frost glittered on the porch railing. Caleb stood outside holding a mug of coffee while Ranger sat beside him watching the sunrise. Neither moved much. Neither needed to. The silence between them felt comfortable. Earned. Weeks earlier, Caleb would have called that impossible. For years he had carried memories he never wanted to revisit. Memories of service. Memories of loss. Memories of a loyal partner whose absence had left a space no one could fill. He had spent a long time believing some doors should remain closed forever. Then one rainy night, a German shepherd appeared from smoke and darkness carrying a mission that refused to be forgotten. Ranger had changed more than an investigation. He had changed a man. Later that afternoon, Emily Harper drove out to visit. She brought homemade cookies and a stack of paperwork related to Ranger's official status. Together they sat around the kitchen table while snow drifted past the windows. Ranger rested nearby, one ear always tuned toward their conversation. Emily smiled as she reviewed the documents. Looks like nobody has come forward. Caleb nodded. Neither of them seemed surprised anymore. Daniel Reed had no immediate family listed in the records. No one remained to claim Ranger. The room fell quiet. Emily looked up. So what happens now? Caleb glanced toward the German shepherd. Ranger lifted his head and met his gaze. The answer felt obvious. He stays home. A smile spread across Emily's face. I thought you might say that. That evening, after she left, Caleb and Ranger walked toward the river east of town. Snow crunched softly beneath their boots and paws. The sky glowed with shades of gold and blue as the sun disappeared behind distant hills. The cold air smelled of pine and wood smoke. They stopped at the same overlook where they had stood weeks earlier. The water below moved steadily through the winter landscape. Caleb rested a hand on Ranger's neck. The old collar lay safely back at home, preserved as a reminder of everything that had happened. Not because the dog needed it anymore. Because some promises deserved to be remembered. Ranger looked out across the river, calm and content. His mission was finished. Daniel Reed's trust had been honored. The truth had survived. Caleb smiled and looked toward the horizon. Somewhere beyond the fading light, one chapter had ended. Another had quietly begun. And if there was grace hidden inside this story, perhaps it was this. Sometimes we rescue someone because they need saving. Sometimes we discover they were sent to save us too. The wind moved gently through the trees. The river continued its journey. And beneath the wide Montana sky, a Marine and a faithful German shepherd stood side by side, finally home.